Welcome to today's webinar. I'm Tom Owen, the Senior Architect at Cocho, mainly working in the identity and governance space. Today we're going to talk about enabling seamless user lifecycles and securing access and looking at what Entra Suite can offer us. So looking at today's agenda, we'll start off just looking at the sort of problems that organizations are having today, then the capabilities of Entra Suite and exactly what that entails. We'll look through the joiners, movers, leavers process and how that relates to the features of Entra Suite and ID governance. Secure employee onboarding, that's an element of ID governance, and also some features of Intune and Entra in general we'll look at there, as well as securing access to the applications and later requests as well, and then just a quick summary and how Cocho can help. So today, in today's world, especially post-COVID, there's a lot of remote work still going on, if not hybrid. But onboarding remote workers can be a challenge, both for user experience, but also from a security perspective, of course. So we'll look at how we can mitigate that. Manual processes continue to cause error and delays, and so we can look at automation to fix those issues. Collaborating with third parties is also a problem. So creating accounts could be slow. You can have governance issues with accounts not being tidied up, and also audit problems further down the line. You'll have heard this one before, but the network perimeter is gone. We now need to focus on the identity and look at continuous evaluation and how those, and if those identities are risky. We also need modern ways of protecting those older systems. They could be legacy systems on-prem. There could just be private cloud systems that we need to secure. So we'll look at how we can do that as well, because on-prem and private cloud isn't going away, even in the world of SaaS apps and remote work. There's also an ongoing need to meet zero trust requirements. And this does feel like a bit of a buzzword for some, and we appreciate that. But regardless, the sort of fundamental elements of zero trust are key to a lot of compliance requirements and regulatory frameworks. So even parts of GDPR and things like the cyber assessment framework and elements of NIST and ISO 27001 all comes back to those pillars, which we'll get into. So what is in the Entra stack? You'll all be aware that it was rebranded a couple of years ago, essentially into 4 pillars. It is now divided. So we have, from a Entra ID baseline point of view, establishing zero trust with Entra ID itself and Entra domain services. Then there's securing workforce access with private access, internet access, ID governance, ID protection, and premium verified ID features, as well as verified ID free, which we'll talk about. Securing customer and partner access. So there's external ID, which covers both B2B and B2C scenarios. And external ID can also be is also the successor to Azure B2C. And beyond that, we can secure access in any cloud. So with Entra Permissions Management, we have multi-cloud permissions management and also workload ID, to secure our managed identities and system accounts. Today, of course, we are here to talk about Entra Suite. So that's the second pillar, securing workforce access, and encompasses all of those newish products. ID protection is obviously an older one, and we'll talk about how that relates to the overall picture. Just a side note as well, Copilot is now woven through all of these technologies and is available for use wherever you're using these features in the portal. So how does Entra help us improve workforce access security? So it's throughout the entire user journey, really. So from onboarding, we have the basic parts of Entra HR provisioning, but also guest onboarding, as we said, with external ID, B2B, and we'll talk about how we can automatically do that through cross-tenant sync or the self-service options. But we can automate and certainly make it easier to onboard those users. We can have verified ID to help onboard remote workers. So we have integrations with identity verification partners to hand off the identity validation for remote staff to third parties. And then hand it back to Entra for onboarding, which we'll talk about. There's also a new element of verified ID, which is face check. So that allows users to take a selfie, which will be compared against their profile photo in the organization to validate it is actually them. So that's more about later requests and beyond onboarding. But before they start, we can govern their access with birthright, so automatically assigned access packages. Lifecycle workflows as well, the lifecycle automation to automate a lot of those tasks, And beyond their first day, we have self-service access, just-in-time access with PIM, and of course, ongoing access reviews and recertifications, all of which is part of the ID governance piece. And then we have securing the access itself. So on an ongoing basis, ID protection is there for continuous evaluation, checking for any unusual elements in the sign-ins or the users themselves, enforcing authentication factors or blocking accounts in high-risk situations. And of course, when it is deemed safe, we are protecting the actual traffic going to the internet with Entra internet access for our M365 and internet apps, and then private access for on-prem apps and private cloud apps. So we'll get into each of those in a bit more detail. And as ever, there is ongoing auditing and reporting throughout the entire cycle. So be it a human task or an automated task, that's logged and audited within Entra. And of course, that can be forwarded to log analytics or to a scene. Let's start with HR provisioning. So this has been around for a while when it comes to Workday and SuccessFactors. There's been standard connectors for quite a while. But what we have now is the inbound provisioning API. So that essentially can allow us to push data from any source. We would use something like a logic app to pull from that system of record. So it could be a database on-prem, it could be even a file, but typically we're looking at, a HR authoritative source, could be cloud, could be on-prem, but it doesn't have to be Workday SuccessFactors anymore. Once it's been picked up and pushed into the provisioning endpoint, we still have the same provisioning service there, which allows us to write expressions and map attributes before being provisioned either directly into Entra or into AD and sync to Entra. Beyond that, of course, we have automatic deprovision, which is a big part of this entire cycle. So when they are made inactive in the source, such as the HR source, or have a leave date, we can automatically deprovision their accounts, not just in AD and Entra, but in downstream systems as well. Just to be clear, this is a P1 license. This isn't necessarily part of Entra Suite. You will get it within Suite as well, but this is something you can do today under E3 or P1. Apologies, my keys aren't working. Okay, so then we'll talk about external users. So this is really for guest users. So typically we used to manually invite them. That's not a good way to do it anymore. And it causes a lot of concerns with audit and keeping track of who's who. Using entitlement management, we can have external users self-service on board and then gain access to a variety of things through an access package. So groups, teams, apps, and SharePoints, as you may be familiar with. That allows us to have a life cycle on those accounts, as well as approval before they're actually created in the system. So as you'll see there, they access the portal based on their email domain. We can just determine who sees what, and if they're allowed in the first place, we can have an approval step in there. Beyond the approval, they're curated automatically. They can get access to resources through that access package or through additional access packages. The ongoing reviews are there. And once they're removed from all of their packages, that user can be automatically cleaned up as well. So therefore, the audit issues go away and people don't retain the access longer than they need. Also, being federated from an external provider, they if they are blocked in their source tenant, so for some reason their account is disabled in their home tenant, they'll no longer be able to sign in anyway. So we have another line of defense there. So typically this is the self-service model, which could be for partners and vendors, maybe even contractors if they don't require a device. For affiliates and sister companies, we also have the idea of multi-tenant organizations, under which there's cross-tenant sync, so we can automatically provision those guest objects from another tenant or just scope it to a certain group. But we can provision users automatically as well, and they're already there ready to work with your applications. In those cases as well, we may want to trust MFA and compliance. So where they're vetted third parties, we can use their compliance status in conditional access like we would with our own Intune devices. We can also trust their MFA to ensure they don't have to do MFA twice, which was a problem with guest accounts in the past. So all of that is under P2, and in fact you get 50,000 monthly active users when it comes to guest accounts, but they are P2 features if you have P2 in your tenant. Beyond P2 with ID governance, there are more features for external users. So we have the extensibility with logic apps, which we'll talk about, which means we can even provision on-premise accounts amongst a whole load of other workflows. That's possible with logic apps. We also have the concept of guest user cleanup, so we can tidy up those guest accounts as needed. But whether we're looking at guest users, external users, or internal users, we want to have some kind of birthrights process in place. So this is automatic access ready for their first day based on criteria in their profiles. We have HR provisioning in place. We see that they're from the marketing team, and the marketing team should have these list of applications from day one. So like an access package, we can group all of those things together. But what's different here is it's automatically assigned, more like a dynamic group. So using the same rule syntax and same criteria options, we can give access to an access package automatically, obviously skipping the approval flow because it's birthrights access. What it gives us beyond dynamic groups, however, is the ability to customize if the assignment should actually automatically happen or be removed, or in a mover scenario, perhaps we want to allow access to their existing role for a number of days before they fully move over. So even when the attribute changes, they can retain access that they previously had. And another thing is being able to trigger those logic apps as well. So the custom extensions element allows us to do that. Now, some of those groups you might give access to on the first day could, of course, be applications that can provision into other services. So that's already for day one. It could also be, again, talking about private access and internet access. We could have the web filtering policies in place and access to those private apps all ready to go on day one. And that's just by being added in the respective security groups that are part of the package. So these are part of ID governance. Automatically assigned access packages are in ID governance and therefore in Entra Suite as well. So to automate our onboarding and offboarding tasks, we have lifecycle workflows. So you could use these for birthrights as well. So we can, of course, just add people to groups and remove people from groups, similarly to an automatically assigned access package. But what we can do here is decide when it happens. So rather than just when the account is created and that piece of data or criteria is there for the birthrights, we can decide to add them to a group on day one if there's a security risk, or a day before, for example. So we have that bit of flexibility. We can also trigger notifications and logic apps to third parties to notify third parties of things. So it could be IT request for the new staff to get a certain type of laptop based on their profile information. So we can dictate if they're from marketing, they'll get this laptop model. That request could even go to a vendor. So if you have an integration partner for Autopilot and Intune, that notification could go to them, ready to get a device out to that user for Autopilot on day one, which we'll talk about a bit more as well. Provisioning FIDO2 keys is now possible programmatically on the Graph, Microsoft Graph. So using a logic app, we could provision a FIDO2 key in advance. It no longer has to be done self-service by the user. So there's another day one passwordless option for them. We can enable the account when we deem necessary. So we would leave it disabled, and of course on the first day we'll enable that ready for them to log on, so it reduces the security risk. And with the likes of Autopilot in place, IT and anyone else, they shouldn't need to log on as that user at any stage. So beyond that, we have other tasks we could automate, perhaps sending a verified ID onboarding links, as we talked about with verified ID on day one. To verify themselves, we could use a third-party provider, an identity verification partner, so somebody can verify themselves with a selfie and their government-issued ID. At that point, we can send a temporary access pass, could be to their manager, which is an out-of-the-box feature. With logic apps, we have ways of sending it directly to a user if we have the required information. So again, all of this can be automated at the point we deem necessary, ready for day one. And of course, that's not just adding of access, it's also removing. And one of the other features now available between Lifecycle Workflows and Entra Cloud Sync is deleting the Active Directory account as well. So the HR provisioning service will disable their AD account and their Entra account if they're linked when deemed necessary by the HR source. But what we can now do with Lifecycle Workflows is actually delete their AD account. So if you have a policy of deleting it 30 days or 90 days after they've left, we can also do that. Up to 180 days is supported. So that's just some of the many features available. I'll give you a quick look as to how that feels. So this is the configuration screen for Lifecycle Workflows. So on the left, you can see some standard offerings there, generating a temporary access pass, perhaps sending a welcome email, adding to groups when we deem necessary. And then we can run the logic app for those custom tasks. So some ideas there, provisioning hardware, procuring hardware, or even creating an admin account. So perhaps an IT staff member should always have an admin account, and therefore, as part of the onboarding process, we'll just create that automatically on day one, for example. And there's a whole load of things that could be part of that process under a logic app. That logic app creating the admin account could also be leveraged from a access package. So rather than create it as part of the onboarding process, we could later do a self-service route to creating that admin account as well. So there's a few things we can do there, but from a lifecycle workflow point of view, these are the types of things you can do. These as well are ID governance features, and so part of Entra Suite. Just to touch on Logic Apps themselves, because I've talked about them a couple of times. So they are actually part of Azure, not part of ID governance or Entra Suite. So it's a pay-as-you-go feature in Azure, like any other infrastructure. It's a very low-cost model, however. So for the types of things we're talking about, it generally doesn't rack up a big cost. But from an onboarding point of view, it could be that system that connects HR and IT. So where we're not using a standard connector, as I say, any source of record we can pull from with a Logic app and then push into the provisioning endpoint. So that's one element of it. We can also enhance the existing capabilities we have. So by being able to trigger one from a lifecycle workflow or from an access package, capabilities that aren't possible out of the box, we can trigger. So some of the things we've just seen, like creating an admin account or procuring a new device, can be done through a Logic app, through that extensibility. And you don't have to build everything. I mean, it's called low code and no code for a reason. There are many out of the box connectors. There's lots of things you can do with the built-in actions and triggers. And this isn't just about cloud resources. We can connect to on-premises as well. We can connect to Azure automation accounts, hybrid work, and there's a whole range of things we can do to make that almost infinitely possible. So going back a step, so we have talked about how the user account is created, some of those automatic tasks that are done on their first day or perhaps ahead of their first day. But say someone is just starting, they're remote, they have received their onboarding link to verify themselves. So we have a portal here with our provider. You will have seen some of this probably in your personal life, if not at work, but you can, validate your details, take a selfie, upload a government ID, and the third-party provider will take that verification, confirm it's all good, pass back a claim to be used in verified ID, and then we have a credential saved in that person's device, which they can use to present themselves to lifecycle workflows, for example, to get a temporary access pass and continue their onboarding journey. So therefore, we can validate new starters without ever needing their data, without them needing to be physically present. We can trigger that next onboarding step. And with this, we can also do account recovery. So that verification has already been done. We've already validated that credential is real. So we can actually use that in later steps throughout the user journey if you need to validate them from a service desk point of view. If we want to make sure that is the person we're speaking to, we can actually get them to show us their credential from verified ID, or they can even do a face check, which we'll look at in a minute. So this is what it looks like on the application. So in Microsoft Authenticator, you would just share this credential and scan a barcode that you've configured. There is some development required here. This would be a custom portal, but there are kits and guidance available on how to do that. This much of it is actually part of Entra ID free. So short of developing some parts of it, there isn't actually a cost associated. Okay, so I've verified myself. I've presented my identity, my passport to the verification partner. I've confirmed I am who I am. I have a verified credential. I've now been able to present that to the system, and so a temporary access pass has been issued to me from Lifecycle Workflows, or perhaps to my manager, or my manager shared it with me. But again, there's a range of options. So just to touch on what they are. So instead of having a password, instead of someone creating or resetting a password and seeing that, we can have a time-limited one-time use passcode. It's only valid on the first morning or the first day that someone joins, so it gives some security to it as well. So this can be used to bootstrap the account. It can allow us to provision autopilot, as we'll look at. We can set up passwordless as well. And so we don't actually need to ever issue a password, and not even a human needs to see what this temporary access pass is. They'll never have needed to log on as that user to the laptop. They'll never have needed to reset the password. This is all happening automatically without anybody but the manager or the end user actually seeing this credential for that first day. And even if they did, it's not usable. And we're not, in this particular scenario, we're not actually sharing it until they've validated their ID anyway. So all of this stuff is a subsequent step of what we've been talking about. Beyond that first day, or even on the first day, we can bypass the MFA requirements, so we can still enforce MFA on everybody. But because this is essentially considered a multi-factor, we can bypass that step in conditional access in order to bootstrap the account and do passwordless and set up passwordless. but it can also be used for account recovery because it does bypass MFA. So obviously you'd want to tread carefully with that. It does become a single factor in that instance. However, you may have some other controls in place, such as validating the identity before you issue that, or perhaps compliant device policies to make sure they are on a company device. This again is not part of Entra Suite. This is part of Entra P1, just to be clear. So with that temporary access pass, on my first day, so as we saw, it could be that the IT department or a third-party vendor, they've already sent me my new laptop, ready to go with Autopilot. Lifecycle workflows have sent me a temporary access pass, so I can actually sign into Autopilot, out-of-the-box experience. This computer's never been used before, but I can use that along with my email address as a credential to configure Autopilot. Of course, then self-service device provisioning takes hold. In fact, on newer devices as well, on Windows 11, if you're not using Autopilot with Windows 11 version 22H2 and that KB shown down below, we can actually log into Windows itself. There's a web sign-in feature, so you no longer have to use local credentials to log into a device. We can log into Windows even with a tap. So that's another capability as well if you're not using Autopilot. In any case, that means we can also log in for the first time, set up Windows Hello, and never actually have a password known, and ideally not need one unless it's for some legacy service, which we could have some capability further down the line to actually configure self-service password reset. But for the most part, for logging onto the device, for logging onto our single sign-on apps, and as we'll see later on with internet access, private access, we shouldn't really need passwords very often anymore. This again is not part of Suite. It's just a side note. It's part of Intune P1, but I wanted to include it here just to show you how all of these things can fit together for remote or self-service onboarding. And then one of the final pieces of the puzzle is global secure access. So this is, of course, part of Entra Suite and part of the new offering. So there's two sides to this. There is Entra Internet Access. So that's for protecting against the unsafe and non-compliant content through a variety of means. There's web content filtering, so we can actually set up policies from day one. As I say, if they're added to a particular group, we can already be sure that even if they're remote and not on a VPN or not on the company network, we have some filtering suitable for that role already in place on day one. And of course, that comes with threat protection, TLS inspection, because we're going over the Microsoft backbone here. So it's a designated network that we're using. We're not going over the actual internet as such, but we can get to our preferred resources using that backbone. And because we're using Microsoft backbone, we also have traffic optimization there. So by using this, we're actually increasing performance as well. So that's for your internet apps. There's a variety of policies we can set up for M365 specifically, and also internet apps. And of course, all of this ties together with conditional access as well. So similarly with private access, which is something built on Entra Application Proxy, which you may have used before. If you already have Entra Application Proxy, we're using the same connectors here. It's just that there's more capabilities unlocked by the licensing. So that allows us to connect to any protocol. So beyond TCP and RDP, which we had with Application Proxy, we can connect to almost anywhere and then protect that, whether it's legacy, on-premises, private cloud, even an SSH. Login, we can protect with conditional access and MFA. So we're removing VPNs. We don't have a always-on sort of network requirements because we're having specific tunnels to specific applications which are always protected, and therefore we can, even in a cloud-first world with cloud-only devices, we can actually protect and publish legacy apps as well. So that's part of Entra Suite, and to see how the two of them work side by side. So at the top there, we've got our different resources. So M365 and Internet, as we can see, is more on the Internet access side. And then we have private access for data center, private cloud, and on-premises requirements. All of this is under the secure access, the global secure access umbrella. And in all cases, we're verifying those identities, those endpoints, and even remote networks to ensure zero trust throughout the access journey. So the final piece I wanted to discuss is face check. So this is not so much for onboarding. This is something we can integrate with access packages. So you may have already validated a credential because on the first day we've done the identity verification with a partner, and so that credential is validated. We have claims there that prove to us that is the person they say they are. But for highly sensitive or high value apps, maybe we want to do an additional check when they request access. So with that integration, not only can we just present a verified credential that's already existing, We can also do a live face check as well. So we can actually ask the user to take a selfie. It will then validate that against the company profile photo that's in the directory, and do a match. And if it's a match, it will allow them to continue with the request. So that's part of Entra Suite. It does come standalone as well, but with Entra Suite, it's considered the premium verified ID, and you get eight face checks per user per month included there for those high value apps. Again, there will be some development required here, but there are developer kits available and some samples available online. So if we have a look at the user journey again, just to recap on everything we've talked about. So we've got Entra here at the center. And so we've got our HR systems, and we're automatically provisioning users, maybe contractors, into Entra, potentially into AD first, depending on our use case. But we've also got external ID here to allow us to onboard our external users. So in this case, we're talking about B2B. It could be a self-service system where we have validations in place to ensure they should have access, automatically getting created as we talked about. It could be cross-tenant sync from a partner organization, automatically creating those external IDs. And they may not even have an Entra tenant. They could be using Google Workspace or another WS-Fed or SAML provider, or even a one-time passcode via email. But their identity is still a guest object, and we can still interact with single sign-on applications in the same way that a staff member would. And as I say, where needed, we have Active Directory users as well. So there's still a need for on-premises accounts in many organizations for those particular apps. And even for those external users, as we talked about, we can provision accounts, objects for them, so they can do single sign-on to Kerberos apps on premises as well. So that's those users getting curated in the directories. But before they actually join, we have a number of tasks, automation tasks taking place. So under ID governance, we have the auto-assigned access packages. So based on those birthrights, we can start to give access to groups and applications. If those applications have provisioning built in, so for example, skim provisioning, or it could be triggering a logic app to do something on an API on a third-party service, we can actually have those accounts created in advance as well, in the same way as adding to an application group would do. Then we're getting closer to the user actually joining. So we're going to have to start thinking about doing some more tasks, day one tasks. Perhaps it's the day before we want to provision some high value apps, not in advance for security reasons, but we will do it one day before and the day they join. So we can provision further apps at the time we deem necessary. We can trigger logic apps for those custom tasks that we talked about at the time we deem necessary. And further onboarding tasks being sent to the user themselves. So those onboarding links, the temporary access pass, all of these things can start to happen, and enabling the account, of course, for day one. Where we have remote users, we can use the identity verification partners. So before they've even got started, they're verifying their identity that's being passed back. We can then issue a TAP, which they can use for autopilot. So the temporary access pass can provision their device or just log into a Windows 11 device, as we talked about. It's their first time logging in, so they're going to set up Windows Hello. They still don't have a password. They've used passwordless throughout. They're using passwordless already, and they will continue to use passwordless with Hello. They could have configured Microsoft Authenticator for web sign-in as well during this process. Now they're actually logged into their device. We want to start checking that their account is protected. So ID protection kicks in on an ongoing basis, checking for risky sign-ins or risky users. So if a problem's been detected, we can enforce a particular factor. It could be a specific authentication factor, not just any MFA now. It could also be a case of blocking their account in a really high-risk scenario. But assuming all is good, we can carry on with that journey. We're now looking at coming to the global secure access. Whether it's a on-prem app or SaaS app, we're going through internet access and private access to securely route the traffic to that service. So you can see from end to end how we've made a number of checks, mostly automated, to ensure that the user is who they say they are, and that their particular login is protected, and that their access is protected on an ongoing basis through all of these mitigations. There is the extra step, as we talked about. So face check for ongoing access requests is another thing we can do. So part of verified ID. So we need additional access. We can then do that. Again, we can have other workflow tasks kicking off in the same way that we would with an access package. So again, it's another check throughout the user journey, and throughout all of this, we have ongoing auditing and reporting. So whether it's a user task, a manual task, or an automation task, all of this is being logged and into Entra ID, which can be piped out into log analytics or into a SIEM for longer term storage. So we can start to build dashboards and reports based on that information as well. Just to be clear, as I said, not all of this is Entra Suite. A lot of the new features we're talking about are Entra Suite, but here there's elements of P1, there's elements of Intune as well for autopilot. But the key new features we want to make use of here are under ID governance, global secure access, ID protection, and verified ID. We're talking a lot about onboarding today. That's not the only thing, of course, we can do here. You'll be familiar with some of these capabilities. So there's privileged identity management. So that's for cloud apps. Could be Azure, could be third-party apps and cloud. Could also be on-premises now. There's a number of things we can do for on-prem accounts, both in terms of provisioning those and dictating their access on the just-in-time basis. Access reviews, of course, on an ongoing basis. We want to keep those reviews going. So whether they're external, internal, specific apps, inactivity reports, we can do all of that through access reviews to make sure packages of apps and standalone apps and external users and everybody else are having ongoing reviews through scheduled reviews that we've built in. There's now the concept of review helpers as well. So we have things like the machine learning based group affiliation, which can tell us if there's an outlier in a particular group that perhaps they shouldn't have access, and also tells us when somebody last logged on to help a reviewer understand if they're actually using the application or logging into Entra at all. And then there's entitlement management. So we talked a lot about birthrights and automatic access, but beyond that, we can use access packages for self-service requests. So we can scope these to eligible people. It's not that everyone needs to see all the packages in the organization. We can scope certain packages to certain users. We can then have approval workflows, even multi-stage approval workflows, before giving access to those packages of groups, apps, and SharePoint sites. We can also trigger logic apps, as you've heard a few times. And built into access packages, we have access reviews. So we can ensure that each package we curate has a review associated with it on an ongoing basis. And that includes automatically removing access where things aren't being used. And also there's the verified ID integration. So as part of that request process, we can present a credential to make sure we have an extra layer of protection to make sure somebody is who they say they are. And also face check as well for that in the moment selfie match against the profile photo in the organization for those high value apps. Okay, so let's have a quick look at the pricing. I guess this is the thing everyone's been waiting for. So let's just quickly run back over what's included here. So we have Entra private access for securely connecting to private apps. We have internet access for secure access to internet and our SaaS apps. There's ID governance for advanced governance workflows and that extensibility we keep on talking about. Entra ID protection for adaptive risk controls. And of course, verified ID premium for not just for the remote onboarding that's included with P1, but for the face checks that are included on a monthly basis as well for that for those high value apps. So that comes in at $12 as a list price. That is actually a $10 saving on all of those individual features if they purchase it by themselves. Many of you are probably acutely aware of the fact that ID protection is not new. That is part of Entra ID P2 or E5. So if you have that already, there is a further discount to mitigate that fact. So $12 is the list price for all of this. There's a cheaper price. I believe it's about $9 list if you have P2 already. So something to bear in mind, but it's really good value if you're starting to make the most of all of these features. So then in summary, we want to look at using these new capabilities in Entra Suite to bolster what we have in E3 and E5. Some of it's overlapping with existing features, some of it's new capabilities, but as you can see from what we've gone through, it's bolstering what's there already. We want to be automatically onboarding our staff and perhaps our contractors from our HR sources. We can have self-service or automated onboarding for external users and guest accounts and provisioning beyond that. We can automate those onboarding tasks, so sending those notifications, sending the onboarding links and temporary access passes, also sending notifications to IT or to third-party providers for shipping those devices ready for autopilot. We can automate those birthrights, so on day one, they already have access, and as they move through the organization, their access moves with them. All of this, again, is extendable with logic apps, so whatever you can't do today, we can build that in. And we can do secure passwordless access to all resources. So as you've seen, we never even need to issue a password where it's not needed anymore. We can send a temporary access pass. We can set up passwordless. We can provision our own device. We can then log on to single sign-on apps, to private cloud apps, all using that passwordless credential. And one thing I haven't talked about much today is offboarding. And I mentioned at the beginning as part of the HR provisioning process. Key, of course, to all of this is disabling accounts automatically. So when the HR source status changes or their leave date is entered or something happens through an access review, we can automatically disable accounts. And then using lifecycle workflows and parts of external ID, we can start to remove accounts automatically as well, not just in Entra, but in downstream applications where we have provisioning in place. So just quickly talk about how we can help. So Coach O have been doing this for a long time. We've seen the ups and downs these projects can bring. But ultimately, through good discovery and a successful project, these benefits are always realized, and even more so now with the added things that we've talked about today. This slide you may have seen before. We've shared this a few times, but we can highlight all of these in even further than before now. So automated provisioning, yes, that's not new, but birthrights access, we have more controls around. We have more things we can do there. There's more assurance of being productive on day one through lifecycle workflows and those automated onboarding tasks. From a security perspective, we still have that HR-driven access, so we're using that criteria for those birthrights and for eligibility to other things. Could also be dictating what access we have to the internet and to those private apps, all driven by birthrights and HR-driven access. That also means, of course, when their account, as I say, is marked as inactive or there's a leave date, we can start to automatically deprovision those accounts. And there's ongoing access governance there, of course, from ID governance and from verified ID and the access reviews that come with that. All of this, of course, is not just about security. It helps reduce costs in the organization. You've seen the amount of manual tasks we've removed through this journey. You've seen how many things we're automating and improving productivity, reducing delays, so avoiding those inefficiencies and ultimately those error-prone tasks that we have to redo a second time. So if you're interested, beyond a full engagement where we can do discovery, design, implementation, we are offering a fixed price workshop at the moment. So that's a 5-day engagement. We can do a couple of days on site or remote if you prefer. We'll do 3 days report. We'll spend 3 days doing a report write-up and how you can deliver the plan. We can also use that for a subsequent project with us or to reduce the amount of discovery that's needed in the future. So this will allow us to give you a report on the next steps that you need to take, the potential products that could help modernize your environment and automate the tasks that you have already, along with projected timescales, indicative costs, and potentially a roadmap as well. You will get these slides afterwards, as we've said, so don't worry about the get in touch details, but do feel free to reach out when you're interested. So to wrap up, we're inviting you to try the new Entra Suite. There is a trial available as well, so if you haven't started it already, you can start that to get to know all of the features we've talked about. Through Entra Suite, we can secure onboarding and access itself through the features we've talked about. We can automate those tasks that have been manually heavy. We have self-service for additional tasks, and we can complement all of this with Azure Logic apps. And whether you choose us or you go down this path yourself, we need to focus on the quick wins and be agile. These projects can go on for a long time. It's important that we do in-depth discovery and make sure you know what you're tackling first. But when these things go on for a long time, not only do things come out in discovery, things come out further down the track as well. Technology changes rapidly, so things that you might need to develop today will be native tomorrow. So it's good to be agile and deliver your project in that regard. And of course, we'd love for you to use us for your journey. We've been over 20 years a leader in identity management. We're an award-winning Microsoft partner across the identity security and compliance space. So whether it's identity and governance, the security and access part, or other elements of M365 and Entra, we are here to help. So on that note, I'm just going to have a quick look through the questions. We have a few minutes left, so I'm just going to see if there's anything we can answer on the fly now before we wrap up. Anything we can't answer now, we don't have time for. As I say, we'll send an email to you later. So there's a few questions here. So I'll start with one from Patrick. So with verified ID for service desk verification, I'm in an education environment. Many students don't set a 365 photo. Can they be re-verifying against their government ID? How much can we trust the MS verified ID hasn't been compromised? Good question. So yeah, I guess the first part, so the face check element does rely on having a photo in your directory. So that's what it's matching against. And of course, it means it needs to be a corporate photo as well. It can't be a picture of a cat. So in that case, no, that's not going to work. But what we've seen we can do with the third-party provider is have that credential stored. So in the onboarding process, we can go through that verification. They've done their match. We then have that claim in Authenticator, and we know that that claim was done by them because it's matched against their their identification. But it's true. I mean, you may have concerns that later on down the track that it's unlikely that verified ID has been compromised, but obviously you may have concerns around the device itself. We would be enforcing, of course, device pins and these types of things to make sure the device hasn't been unlocked. But if you have any doubts, yes, we can trigger that identity verification step again. So there, typically this is a third-party provider, so there may be a cost associated with doing that depending on how that works. There's a number of partners available. But yeah, we could, if we wanted to, trigger that further down the track and enforce that at a later date. Although that's not the same as face check as we've been talking about. Will we be sharing the slides? Yes, we will. Does the solution support decoupling the creation of users from a single HR system and creating a provisioning service in something like MuleSoft as an integration tool, which manages the event from multiple systems or API-based services to coordinate the employee lifecycle? So I guess you're thinking around the lines of some kind of metaverse. So there is no metaverse built in to Entra today, but there are ways around that. So there's things you can do with Azure Data Services. Within Power Pages, we have a Dataverse as well, which we can look at. Koto are actually also looking at building a tool to layer on top of Entra, which will give us some sort of metaverse capabilities as well. So watch this space. So out of the box, no, but there are a number of things we can do to develop that. And there is more coming in that space to help mitigate those scenarios. Question for the end of the session from Stephen. When using sign-in and user risk conditional access policies to force password resets on high risk, are guest users forced to reset their passwords within their own tenants? No, and I think that you've said you haven't found anything concrete in documentation. I think there is documentation, but the answer is no. It will actually block a guest user. So we can't mandate the reset of a password in a third-party tenant. So what happens to them is just being blocked, and they would need to be unblocked to continue. So consider it a block user scenario. I think we have a new question. Regarding the FIDO key assignment, do you have a distribution process that supports asset tracking of the keys? So we haven't looked at this yet, but this is certainly something you could do with a Logic app. As I say, you'd need to use Logic apps to actually assign that FIDO key in advance programmatically anyway. So as part of that process, we could take the serial number and store that in a database or in a Excel sheet, for example. So there's things we could definitely build into that. Right, so I think that's the end of all the questions, and we're almost out of time. So I'd like to thank all of you for joining today. I hope it was what you were looking for. Do feel free to reach out to me or to Kocho in general for further support on any of these topics. You'll get the slide deck shortly, which has a number of links at the end as well for references to what I've been talking about today. So on that, I'd like to thank you all again, and I'll say goodbye.